Okay, we are live. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll give a couple of minutes before we get started fully on this session. I know sometimes there's a few late joiners, so we'll just give them a moment or two. But Kevin, thank you for joining us here. How's your day going so far?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Nihil, and day is going well so far. Yeah, going well. Can't complain. How about yourself?
Good. Yeah, full steam ahead. It's a lot of different moving parts that we're trying to get going. A lot of exciting projects. So, yes, a nice busy day. It's how we like it.
If it's anything like the days when I was over there not too long ago, over in Manchester, watching the team move at lightning speed, I'm sure it's quite a hectic day. You got to keep it up with the pace. So,
Yeah,
well
yeah.
done to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think we've really had a chance to catch up since you came over to Manchester. Now the dust settles, what did you think of the city?
I loved it. In fact, it's funny. One of the I guess call it team building exercises that we did was we went out to what's called Flight Club, the darts place, and I've been obsessed with trying to figure out how do I franchise that here in the States. I think they're up in Boston, but yeah, I had the greatest time just meeting the team and kind of getting to know the city a little bit, which was great. And but that definitely left an impression. I've been researching franchising dart facilities. So yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those where when you explain it to people that haven't played before, it sounds really odd. And then you get into it with all the mini games, and you get the sort of it ekes out the competitiveness of everyone. It's a really good icebreaking activity.
Yeah, no, that's the best part. Is just seeing the competitive nature in everybody. I mean, especially with Charles, he does not want to be defeated, so he was taking it pretty serious. So
yeah, I think everyone tries to play it off cool at first, and then the creative competitive juices get flowing. Yeah, right. One thing you guys have in the States, if you don't have here, is cornhole. I feel like that's a bit of a gap.
Yeah, that is actually that there are. I guess a lot of the pubs, a lot of the restaurants will have a area designated, whether it's inside or outside in the summertime for cornhole. And so, yeah, I guess that is kind of a craze. I think it's died down a little bit, but like I said, I'm hell bent on making darts a thing in the States. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I guess with cornhole we get 2 weeks of summer here, so maybe not the best activity for us. We'll hide away in the pub and play darts. I think that's probably where we're better off.
Fair enough.
Lovely. Okay, I think we've given it a couple of minutes now. I think we can get cracking with the session today. So, brilliant. Look, thank you everyone for joining us on this webinar today. The topic for this session is all about how to turn dark web exposure into recurring revenue with uBreach Pro. So there's just a quick bit of housekeeping before we get going. We have a lot of content to cover today, but we also want your input. So please use the chat box to post any questions during the session. The usecure team are on hand to answer any of the questions that you have. We are also planning a couple of polls throughout the session as well to get your viewpoints. We want to gather your feedback, want to get your insights on your own experience when it comes to dark web monitoring. The session is recorded, so you can share it with your colleagues, you can review the content afterwards, and we are ultimately here to support you after the session too. So note down any key areas of interest, any critical topics you'd like to dig deeper into. At the end of the session, you'll be able to book a one-to-one with one of our product experts, and they'll be able to discuss your specific requirements and make recommendations off the back of it. So onto the actual session itself. So like I mentioned, the focus today is all around dark web exposure. When we think about security, so much is around reducing risk spread, reducing vulnerabilities, reducing access to those vulnerabilities. And a major source of vulnerability and access is the huge amount of personal information that is readily available on the dark web. It's information that malicious actors would absolutely love to get a hold of. It essentially provides ammunition to their attacks. These are massive sources of exposure that exist outside of our visibility and sometimes outside of our control. And yet, most clients, especially in the SMB space, don't really have proactive measures in place to identify what's out there on their staff members and then remediate. So today is all about how you as an MSP can take that gap and turn it into a commercial opportunity. not only can we fundamentally reduce the risk for our clients, we can also use this as a lever to grow our MSP. And with that in mind, I'm delighted to be joined on this webinar today by the face of dark web monitoring in Kevin Lancaster. So Kevin, it's great to have you on the session today. I imagine a lot of people are on here today interested to get your insights, interested to get your experience, but for maybe those of you, those who don't have too much familiarity with you, maybe could you just spend a minute or two giving an introduction to yourself, please?
Yeah, no, again, thanks for having me on. So again, the background is I stumbled across this world maybe 15 years ago, this world of data, illicit data, dark web data, the dark web or Tor in general. And actually, we were supporting at the time a government agency, U.S. government agency, right around the time they were compromised by China, by a nation state. And during that time, we saw that, yeah, there was a really bad exploit that took the data of 4 million current and former government employees. But when we started to look and see what data might have already been leaked, or what if that data was leaked out on the dark web, we realized that there is a much bigger problem. And at that point, and you're talking now almost 11 years ago, it's hard to believe, but at that point, we could say definitively about 800,000 of those people had already had their data exfiltrated in third-party data breaches, whether it's passwords or national insurance numbers or social security numbers here in the States. And that was really kind of the genesis behind commercializing the capabilities of monitoring the dark web and alerting companies that there is a big problem, right? This growing issue at the time, and it's funny, again, almost 11 years later, it's become even more of an issue. This the idea behind reusing compromise or reusing credentials, it hasn't gone away. In fact, it's gotten even worse. And so maybe a little background: I commercialized a company in this space and spent the last 10 years preaching that you have to look at this exposure data, because these are the unforced errors. These are the weak links that take down networks and cause just disasters from a security standpoint. So yeah, so it's, I've been hell bent on helping the world figure this stuff out and proactively defend against this.
It's interesting you mentioned about how it's a problem that we haven't quite been able to crack, even though awareness of it has increased, even though I suppose an understanding about maybe the remediation steps that people should be taking is perhaps people are more aware of it than ever before. And yet, when we look at the practical structures people put in place, the remediation steps they actually do carry out, it hasn't quite evolved at the same rate that the attacks have evolved. So that's part of what we want to discuss today, and it's part of why it's great to have you on the session, Kevin, because what we want to do with this first half is make it more of a conversation, more an understanding of your perspective on dark web monitoring, maybe a little bit about the history of it, where you see it going in the future. And then in the second half of the session, we'll go through more about how, with all of those different elements in mind, how usecure can help MSPs with evolution. So again, it's going to be a pretty open conversation. Obviously, I'm sure we can explore quite a few different facets, and that's why I'm really keen to jump in and make the most of this time. I know you mentioned just then, Kevin, about how there was that contract which essentially got you into dark web monitoring in the first place. So does that mean this wasn't necessarily an intentful sort of move for you in the first place? It was more you saw the opportunity there and you thought, okay, we can really take this and expand on a wider basis?
Yeah, look, so we were hired to one, look for what data was out there. So we had been in this space for quite some time, been supporting government agencies, whether they were civilian or defense intelligence agencies, but we really didn't think to commercialize it. It was really more of a national security and infrastructure type of focus. But as we started to, again, realize the magnitude of the data that's out there, we realized that we had to basically say pivot, because we still had our enterprise and government focus. But at that time, we realized that government's starting to take this stuff more serious. They have they're throwing money at, they have capabilities, but the average SMB, small business, even up to the end, some of these enterprise businesses, they had absolutely no clue of how bad it was and how porous their networks were. And again, these are in a lot of cases, self-inflicted wounds, right? Because of, pattern recognition and user behavior. People have a tendency to use the same or a derivation of the same password across just about everything they log into. And it's not, at times it's not because they're, being malicious or intentful. It's just, it's convenience, right? Everyone's moving at a million miles a minute. And, I'm sure we'll get into this, but we're at this really, I think kind of this second inflection point because, we've been talking about the concept of sprawl and how many applications people have had to start using, how many apps are on the smartphone, how many, different, websites that you log into on a daily basis. But, it's starting to, explode because of AI, because of all these new AI enabled tools that everybody wants to try, right? Because they're convenient and they're helping to change how you do business and what you do in your personal lives. And so the idea originally was, all right, how could we take this, more sophisticated capability and bring it to the rest of the marketplace? And it started with training. It started with, we spent years, whether it was up on Capitol Hill with our, congressmen and women and the senators and kind of the intelligence folks up on the Hill, started with them. And then we realized that, again, we have to bring this to the rest of the world because just everybody is at risk.
And when you took it from those government entities to these more small to medium-sized businesses, what was the type of response that you got from them when you asked them about or started to talk to them about dark web monitoring and dark web exposure? Because I know a lot of our partners, sometimes when they speak to their clients, especially if they're non-technical, they hear the term dark web. Their client sees this as this sort of abstract concept that isn't necessarily relating to them and their 30 staff members. How did you, what was the response like when you started to broach this topic with more SMBs?
It's funny because we would oftentimes, actually the early days where we had a pretty sophisticated capability and pretty sophisticated platform. And we would have conversations and we would say, hey, we found it in this form, in this language, and here's the command and control server, and here's the IP address. And at that point, it was like, people's minds would just, they couldn't process it, right? You say dark web on one hand, and then you start, talking about tactics and languages and stuff like that. And got to realize pretty quickly that we had to get, really straight to the point. And so your data is out there, right? And is this your password? And it wasn't to be brash or offensive or, to embarrass somebody. It was to prove the point that, look, this data is out there. And so, it's funny, you would get a lot of individuals they would get defensive about it or be like, oh, I haven't used that in a while or what have you. And then, you'd show them that password had been involved in 4 or 5 different external data breaches, third-party data breaches. Again, that they had no idea, right? I mean, you put your, email address, you sign up for an application, you put an email address and password in there, and you think, great, now I'm logged into this application, but you don't think that, what are they doing for security? And that's that domino effect that we've seen over the last, 10, 12 years. But, I think you'd have these conversations and people would be like, I haven't used that in a while or whatever. Or then you show them that it's been involved in 4 or 5 or 6. And at that point, it's like, all right, well, that's, well, whether you use that password or not, right, you need to, start, changing your behavior. And then you'd have some that would react, properly. They would have that, oh, what moment. And they would say, hey, hang on one sec. I got to go change the password to 6 different things, my bank and what have you. So the reaction ranged. I think over time we learned to understand, people's behaviors and the pattern recognition of how people respond to this type of data. But as I mentioned, I mean, it's you'd hope that 10, 11 years on that it would gotten better, but just because of how complex things are and the speed of how fast technology moves, I mean, it's it's gotten even worse. It's gotten significantly worse, and this new wave of AI tool and exploits is I fear is gonna make it even worse than it already is, right? So it's interesting times.
Yeah. Well, what are the, let's dig into that a bit more then. What are the, particularly when we think about AI, what are the key mechanisms by which that is accelerating how dark web data is used?
So if you look at fundamentally what's happening with software, right? And that's where, I mean, a lot of people, if they want to lump AI into a category, right? It's generally speaking, they lump it into this kind of software category. So, back in the day, and this back in the day is really, 6 months ago or a year ago, right? You had what was considered traditional SaaS software, right? You sign into an application and you got username and password, and it was pretty, I wouldn't say dumb from that perspective, right? But you're interacting with inside of that application, and then fast forward to, well, go back 3 years ago when you really start to hear about the large language models and the foundational models, right? And the idea was that you could ask it questions, you could, proactively upload data into this big, unknown, what is AI and where's the data going, what have you. So if you kind of classify some of these new applications, right, you have these foundational models that everybody knows about. So the Perplexities, the Geminis, the ChatGPTs, Anthropics, Claudes of the world. But then you have another layer of applications today that are the AI-enabled applications, right? So it could be that traditional software, that it might be a CRM, but now you have the ability to ask the CRM questions about your data, and you have the ability to upload more data into your CRM and interact, right? And so you've actually created another potential exploit vector, because it's not just your data structured the way it was structured. Now your data it's structured, plus it's going out to this LLM, right? Which is typically outside the confines of that application. So you've got kind of the foundational models, and now you get these AI enabled tools, and then you have a whole wave of new AI native applications coming out that they've figured out how to build, their own AI application. So I give the example often, right, where if you and I were having a conversation over Zoom or Teams or something like that 12 months ago, right, or maybe it's 4 or 5 of us, and you're hoping that somebody's sitting there taking notes about what do we need to do next, right? Well, today just about everybody has an AI scribe. So when you log into that Zoom or that Teams, you have an AI tool that's taking notes, right? So now what was once a private conversation between a couple people, and you're taking notes and then sending it off to whoever needs to do something. Now that conversation is going into 2 or 3 or 4 AI scribes, and then you get the output, and then maybe somebody in marketing saying, hey, here's what we talked about. Now go make a campaign. And, the team member in marketing is saying, all right, great. I'm going to use this tool to create a campaign, and I'm going to use this tool. So now your data went from, private conversation to 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 new, AI tools, right? So the challenge that we are at today, or what we're seeing today, is that the sprawl is just exploding, right? It's not just the number of tools that you're logging into, but it's the fact that that data, is easily extracted, and it's going to dozens, in most businesses' cases, dozens of additional LLMs. So data is just free flowing at this point. So these are pretty significant challenges for everybody to start to really understand and deal with.
And it links with the point that you made earlier about how quite often it's not malicious intent from the end user. It's trying to operate in the modern realm with technology and an accidental insider threat. And I think that that's something which a lot of people are juggling right now, is how do they encourage their staff members to be more efficient with AI and to utilize the tooling that's there, but also to not overexpose themselves. And what the sort of, I suppose, safeguards and guardrails that you've seen organizations put in place so that they get the benefit of this increased efficiency without massively overexposing their staff members?
Well, I think first things first, right? And I think this is incumbent upon every, whether it's a service provider or just every internal organization. First things first is you have to set a baseline, and you have to educate the business on the use of just what is AI, like the stuff that I just described, right? 6 months ago, 12 months ago, everybody was happy because they're doing their thing in their software. Now they've got this whole new world of AI tools. So I think first things first is that it really comes down to pausing and setting a baseline and training everybody on what this new world is, right? And at times maybe it can seem daunting, but I think if you look at it in that perspective, right, there's probably 2 or 3 different layers of applications today, right? There's, again, the traditional tools that we're using. There's these new LLMs, and then now these AI-enabled applications. So I think that's first things first, is that you have to bring awareness to what is AI and what are the potential challenges that might arise with AI. From there, I think it's a matter of doing an assessment, right, and understanding what AI tools is your team using today. We have a ton of data now on the number of applications that a business uses and the percentage of AI tools that the business uses today. And I can tell you, going back to less than a year ago, September 2025, average business was right around 88.1 applications. And in that, there's only 2 that were AI native or AI enabled, right? So an LLM. So maybe they started messing around with ChatGPT, and then maybe their CRM said, hey, we've got this, integration to Copilot or something like that. But we did that same analysis in March of 2026, and we're up to 96.2 tools. And out of the 96, 16 of those tools were either AI native or AI enabled. And so you think about that in a matter of 8 months, something like that. You've seen that dramatic of an increase in not just the number of AI tools, but then now the existing tools are using to have AI in it. So this is one of those moments where this is why education, security awareness training is fundamental. It's a cornerstone to every business because you have to understand kind of the new pitch we're on, right? The new playing field that we're on. So I mean, I can go on for hours and hours on this specifically, but like this is table stakes to every business moving forward. You have to set that foundation, and that starts with training, and then you start to really understand what applications, and then from there you start putting policies and security in place, because you don't want to discourage people from evolving and helping the business evolve, but you don't want to create unnecessary risk, and that's what's happening to every business right now.
And are there any, I suppose, newer or more creative ways that you're seeing malicious actors take the data they get from the mass sprawl of what people are using, from the amount of information that's being pumped into LLMs? And how is that changing how attackers are using that information compared to what they might have done previously with a more classic data breach?
Yeah, well, let's look at this in two different vectors, right? One, it's going back. Let's go back 8 years ago. All right, let's go back to pre-COVID days. The average business was using something like 25 different applications, somewhere in that neighborhood, 25, 26, right? And at that point, you could say this is your attack surface, right? You have 25, 26 applications, and then you have your network, right? And so at that point, you're using these applications and you're hoping that they're secure and they haven't been exploited through, some type of data breach and what have you. But again, today, the attack surface has exploded. So that's kind of the first vector, right? Every business needs to realize that their attack surface area is gone up by 3-4x over the last 8 years. And that's material, right? Because now your not propensity, but your risk for being exploited, whether it's coming into your network or again, these third-party applications being exploited are, your risk is 3 or 4 times greater than it was. The interesting thing about these new wave of AI applications is that they are smart, right? They're evolving, they're learning. And, there've been some pretty stark warnings out there by, Anthropic and some of the large foundational platforms that said, hey, look, you got to be really careful with these applications. And we're actually going to throttle back the security capabilities of some of these applications, because if they fall into the hands of the bad guys, malicious actors, they can really do some damage. And so the challenge is now these agentic platforms, these security exploit platforms, they can analyze your network, they can analyze an application, they can find the vulnerabilities, and they can do it persistently. Where in the past you would have you'd have these attacks on a network. Maybe it's a DDoS attack where they're just kind of flooding you with traffic and then trying to go through the back door through an exploit. Those typically would last an hour or two. Maybe an exotic one would last, I don't know, half a day. But now with AI and the fact that these things can learn and evolve so fast, these attacks are lasting for weeks and they're persistent. And, at the same time they're attacking, the, AI is learning, and it's learning, all right, I got to go left, I got to go right, I got to go back around, or this wasn't patched, 6 months ago. And so the challenge is that the applications that are out there now to exploit a business or an application, they're just incredibly smart, and they're incredibly fast, they're incredibly efficient, and they're incredibly persistent. And this is the new era, right? This is a new challenge that we all have to deal with. And going back to what you guys do so well, I mean, it starts with education, right? It starts with getting people understand. You have to use your good password hygiene, right? You have to, let your organization know that you're using another LLM, and not to call out the marketing, departments and a lot of the, maybe folks that are listening, but marketing departments are the worst, when it comes to, the hygiene, in that, they want to try the new tool that helps them, create images, and they want to try the new tool that helps them create content and, market more effectively. And they're trying, about 2 or 3 new ones a week. And that creates a lot of blind spots if there's not the right, policies and security controls in place in the business. And so, yeah, this is the challenge, right? Because everyone wants convenience, everyone wants to move the business forward, which is, that's fantastic. But again, that going back to those 2 vectors, one, that the attack surface is dramatically, larger, and it's increasing by the week. And 2, these new AI tools that are coming in to, exploit vulnerabilities are smart, they're persistent, and they're going to get smarter and more persistent. So that's just again, that's the new paradigm we're in.
Yeah, it's a great summary. It's a manifestation of essentially like mass personalization. In our world, what's always helped us in the human risk vector is you've always had spray and pray attacks, and it's just a case of let's see what sticks. And the ones that typically actually got engagement were those where they were hyper personalized, they were persistent, like you say. They would be smart about how they would look at the infrastructure and actually get in front of the end user. And previously, what always helped us was that was incredibly labor intensive.
Yeah.
And like you say, those barriers have just been stripped back one by one incredibly quickly over the last 6 months alone. And then what you're left with is, as you mentioned, a reliance on the end user. And so often that's the element in the cybersecurity posture which is neglected, which hasn't been empowered, which hasn't been informed about their own responsibilities, which sometimes either through fault of their own or just from the culture in security have a complacency about their level of responsibility when it comes to security. A lot of end users feel like, oh, I'm being asked to use all these AI tools. I'm being asked in marketing to try these different things that can make our campaigns quicker and better and stronger. But at the same time, maybe I'm not getting empowered about how I should do so safely and how I can be an asset to the security posture rather than a weak point of entry. So I think that brings on really nicely as well to, I think, another area that I really want to dig into with you, Kevin, which is, I think it's clear from this first sort of 15, 20 minutes or so that the recurring thing here is that the data exists, right? The threat exists. Like you said, the sprawl is getting wider. It's 3 or 4 times wider. The sort of the net that can get cast now, it's only getting bigger. It's only getting more accessible, and this is something which is impacting our clients now. And so the question shifts really from, is this relevant, to how can I tap into this? It's a common challenge for partners in a lot of domains in cybersecurity. how can I turn that risk into a commercial opportunity? And so I really want to dig into the opportunity gap that exists for our partners here. And obviously, a lot of what we've spoken about, I imagine a lot of partners have researched into it. They've maybe been to different conferences and heard about these evolutions. But why do you think a lot of MSPs still aren't really monetizing dark web monitoring, human risk management as a whole?
I think it still comes down to, and I apologize. This is an area that I tend to be pretty frank about when discussing. I'm leaning in here, as you can see. So by nature, most MSPs are technicians, right? And most aren't. They're not used to from a sales standpoint. They look at this at times as being impersonal or too personal, and the conversation might get combative, right? And again, we saw a lot of that early on, right? With when we brought dark web monitoring into the marketplace. But if you look at the environment today, I think there's two things that an MSP can do to basically diffuse that conversation, the perceived conflict in the sales conversation, right? Because that's oftentimes what it comes down to, right? There's two things. One, this data exists; it's out there, right? And and it's growing, right? I mean, the data out on Tor, even on the surface web, is growing exponentially, because of the volume of exploits that are out there. So I think when you bring data to a customer, say, look, this is your data, right? So we're trying to be proactive in helping you understand the magnitude of the problem that's out there. Whether you want to admit that that's your password or not, that's a whole different conversation, right? But the fact is, we found 50, 100, 200 email addresses, that have a email, domain, maybe some other PII and a password, right? So that's one thing. And two, I think this is interesting, right? Most MSPs, most businesses haven't thought about this. I was working with a firewall company not too long ago, and firewalls have been around for 30 years, something like that. And by nature, a firewall sees the traffic and they see how many applications that a business is using, but they never once stop and say, all right, let's create a report and show them the sprawl. Let's show them how many applications you're logging into, right? Or the business is using. And I think that's something that an MSP today can do quite easily. They can show not just the sprawl, but they can show at the same time, through the applications you guys provide, the number of compromised email address and passwords that are out there. And so it's not it's not a conversation that should be adversarial, right? It should be, hey, here's the deal. Here's this level of sprawl that's increasing dramatically. And here's the level of compromised data that's out there that has increased dramatically, right? We need to sit down and help you understand that, this is how bad it is and this is how bad it's getting. And so my, personal bias in this, and I'm not, a great salesperson or anything like that, but I think when you bring, a business's own data to them, right? And you sit down and say, look, we have to help optimize your business, and we have to enforce policy. We have to train people, right? And then, put in the right security controls. I think that's how those conversations should evolve, because, back in the day, people were just rushing to the end and saying, hey, here's your data, and now you got to buy all these tools, right? That wasn't the right approach. Now, granted, that data helped MSPs sell all those additional tools, because at that point, the ones that got it understood that this is material, and this is, this is not good for our business. So I think MSPs, when they're going in and having these conversations today, like, this should be the tip of the spear that helps you sell every other application that you've been trying to bring to your customers. It should be a natural conversation to say, all right, here's the compromised data, here's the level of sprawl, right? We have to start training people, and we have to start enforcing good password hygiene, right? We have to start whitelisting. We have to start looking at your DNS records and making sure that everything's right, is up to snuff. I think that's the power of, uBreach Pro, I guess your guys, platform, right? It's not just, security awareness training, right? Like this legitimately is the tool that allows an MSP to sell all the other security solutions and identity solutions that they've been trying to sell. And so when you can go into a customer and say, all right, here's again the level of sprawl that's going on, and here are all the compromised passwords and email addresses, right? Whether want to admit it or not, this is why we have to have that conversation. And I think that kind of approach diffuses this adversarial, kind of approach, and it turns it into a very natural, conversation. Like we are trying to be proactive, but we have to work with you guys to start training you more effectively, and you have to sign up for monitoring because again, this stuff's not slowing down, right? It's speeding up.
It's a great point about effectively building the story about how dark web monitoring exposure is, like you say, the tip of the spear. It's what then flows into the rest of the offering of an MSP. And I think one thing that a lot of partners can struggle with is how to weave together that story. Because you're absolutely right, it can be quite tempting when an MSP runs a report on the dark web, sees a tons of data, and then sees $signs and then jumps straight to it. And I think quite a lot of the issue is building that narrative around it. And if we can do that in a skillful way, it fundamentally helps the client to see that there is a journey that they can be taken on with the MSP, with the products that they have to offer. But the end goal is ultimately to be more secure. And it almost makes it a step-by-step process that the client, it just feels very natural, rather than just what's the next thing my MSP is trying to sell to me. There is validation, there's justification here. We've incorporated dark web monitoring because, as you've mentioned a few times, the human risk element is such a clear remediation step to take off the back of it. Train your staff members on how to set secure passwords, train them on how to use LLMs, train them on what the dark web actually is, create policies around how they should be operating, what they should be signing up for, whether they need approval for new tools, essentially put those guardrails up. But it's not just human risk management. And so much around what modern MSPs are trying to do is around making sure they have a robust story where the different products that they have combine to create a better together offering. And I think that's something which a lot of MSPs, as you rightly say, have struggled with. I know it's something we'll go on to in sort of the second half of the session. But I know, Kevin, from what we've spoken about, you're really big on enablement. It's a massive part about what you speak about making sure that MSPs are extracting as much support from their vendor as they possibly can. And with MSPs that you've seen garner success with dark web monitoring as that tip of the spear, what are the key ways that they are typically leveraging their vendor to help with building that story, to help with selling the product, to help with the onboarding? How are they best leaning into their vendors?
Yeah, I think they should be demanding of their vendors, to provide them, support. I often say, a lot of these, what separates, a vendor in a product category, right? And again, obviously big fan of what you guys are doing. And I think this is what separates you guys from, the rest of the pack, is that, what separates a vendor is, an MSP's got 88 tools in their technology stack, and they're a small MSP. I mean, oftentimes they're struggling to figure out what end is up, right? Especially the, smaller ones that are emerging that, they might have a couple customers, right? Might be, owner-led business, or might be, 10 people. And 1 minute they're hopping on the service desk. Next minute they're trying to make, calls or going to a networking event, what have you. The vendors that lean into enablement, that provide, white labelable, like sales, briefs, the ones that, are able to help lean in and train the partner. Those are the vendors that they do well. And you can name the more successful vendors in this space because their enablement programs are world-class. And so I think the MSP should be demanding, or when they're looking at vendors, they need to really understand, like, how are you going to help me, sell this, right? This is a team sport. MSP grows, the vendor grows. Vendor grows, MSP grows, right? It's kind of, it's a very, it's the great part about this industry and the relationships. But I think it's leaning into, right, here's the latest, statistics, what's going on in the industry, right? Here's the latest campaign that you can run, to start, having the conversation. Here's a white label brochure or flyer or something you can just, slap your logo on and walk in and have a conversation. Or, here's when you do a report. So if you're scanning for credentials, here's a report that I can just drop my logo on real quick and just make it easy. It's like, the vendors that, it doesn't matter how simple or complex the product is, but the vendors that are able to do that are the ones that, the MSPs become raving fans, right? Because you're making their job a lot easier, right? Again, they have to learn not just your product, but they have to learn, all the other, tools that are in the arsenal. And so, yeah, and they tend to gravitate toward the vendors that, are able to, support them and empower them. And so, I think that's what's great. I mean, you guys are also staying really out in front when it comes to the content, and the quality of the training and being AI first, with a lot of this AI messaging first. And you see a lot of the vendors are lagging in that category, right? And so, I mean, those are things I had an MSP years and years ago. Again, that's how we built out our capabilities and launched software companies originally. But we would look for the vendors that are going to help us, understand the product and sell more effectively. And I think that's just common sense. And so, yeah, I think this is a team sport, right? And you guys obviously are pretty darn committed to helping that the partners get enabled, use these type of sales tools and approaches to sell more effectively. And so that this is just, again, there's some, I've said it now 2 or 3 times, kind of table stakes, just some bare minimums in this industry that, vendor needs to do. And if they're not doing it, they become obsolete pretty quick. And it's cool to see you guys leaning into that and helping these MSPs really understand the battle that, that their customers are up against, but then, giving them the materials to be able to go sell there more effectively. So that's just the way this industry works, right?
That is I couldn't have asked for a better segue into the next section. That's perfect, Kevin. Yeah, look, it's a major goal of ours is to try and make this as easy as possible for MSPs. To give them an accessible, a scalable, and ultimately free way to demonstrate the real risk to their clients. You've mentioned it before about getting data to an end user, showing specifics on that organization, on their employees, showing their actual passwords. It's so important to make that real for them. And that's why we've built this enablement tool called Domain Scan Reports. It's, again, readily available to all of our partners. It's designed to allow you to get a snippet into your client's dark web exposure. How it works is super, super simple. As an MSP, you just need to enter your client's domain. There's white labeling, which is optional, but obviously very much recommended. You'll then emailed a report pretty much instantly. That report will look something like this. So you can see how many breaches we found on that client. We can see how many emails were affected. We can list up to 5 breached emails. We can tell you the breach they were involved in, the category of information that was exposed, and also the first and last letter of the password they had exposed. As an MSP, you now have essentially like a dossier on each and every one of your clients included within usecure, simply from just entering their domain. There's no need to ask your clients if they want this report. It's a brilliant hook. It's the moment where the conversation changes from being theoretical risk to instead being real life exposure that ultimately has to be remediated. As a client, now you're aware of these risks. We're not trying to ambulance chase. It's about identifying what is actually just already out there and making it an informed decision about how you now act upon it. It's the critical tool that really allows the MSP to build a business case. They can present that data in QBRs. Quite often a CEO or a CFO will show up on that list of breached users. All of a sudden, you get the client visualizing it. They start picturing what happens if that data gets exposed, if somebody gets a hold of that information. If a malicious actor is able to use that password to access our Teams channel, or use it to craft an incredibly targeted spear phishing attack and harvest information through that route. So using this domain scan report essentially gives them the ability to turn, again, that theoretical risk into tangible proof. it's not about fear mongering. It's about presenting real data that already exists. Kevin, I think when we were speaking before, you gave me a really good story about how you were at an event, you were pushing a similar report, an exposure report, and you had people queuing up at your booth to try and get that report for themselves. That's obviously a commercial dream, having people queue up for your proof of concept. What were the main elements of your messaging that generated that demand for a report similar to this?
Well, it's actually something is quite interesting. So when we would go to some of these industry events, these MSP events, we would try to figure out, which MSPs were going to be there. And, if we had a speaking spot, we would say, all right, there are 25 MSPs in the room, and here's the average number of compromised credentials that are average number of compromised credentials across this entire group. And let's have a conversation. So come back to the booth and we'll show you the data. And after we'd have that conversation, we'd get every MSP back to the booth, and they would just be completely floored. And we'd have MSPs signing up on the spot. We'd have MSPs calling their best customer or one of their a couple of their customers, like literally as they're signing up, saying, hey, John, we got to talk, get your passwords. They've been exposed, and we're generating revenue, almost even before they signed up with us, which was interesting. And we said, look, this is the same. You do the same thing with your, if you're doing a lunch and learn or you're doing a chamber event or something like that, right? Going in and saying, hey, look, the average number of compromised, credentials or email addresses and passwords, in this room are 10. Come back and I'll show you a quick report. That becomes, extremely powerful. And that's how, MSPs, why would we get, on a daily basis, 2, 3, 4 MSPs saying, hey, I just generated another, 5,000 ARR, or 10,000 ARR with this one customer just by turning on monitoring, right? And let alone all the other, additional, tools and services they're able to provide. So, yeah, I think that's one of the things that MSPs can do is, if they're doing some of these lead generation events, or doing lunch and learns, webinars. Again, it's not to call out anybody, right? And there's a very obviously tactful way to do that. But say, look, this is the average number of compromised credentials, all right? And then let's have a conversation. And, oftentimes it would be 80, 90%, conversion rate, just by having those conversations. And the ones that didn't convert there on the spot or within a week, they would convert within 90 days just because, again, we would get more alerts on that, organization. And so I think those are ways that MSPs can effectively start to generate conversations with prospects, with current customers. Again, not to make it adversarial, but the MSPs have to realize today that, again, because of the attack vector, because it's, the surface is going, so large, it's actually making it harder for an MSP to do their job effectively. And so there is still that concept of, basically denial of service, saying, look, hey, if you don't want to sign up for this, right, then you have to sign this, basically denial of service, because you're making our job to protect you a lot harder because we're not in control of these, 19 applications that you use and their security, right? So you need to turn on this, monitoring to make sure that we're all seeing as much as we can, and we're all trying to defend you as effectively as possible, right? So again, I think those are some of those subtle, sales, tactics. Maybe some are not so subtle, but those are the ways that honestly MSPs have been extremely effective in showing and converting, customers. And so hopefully I answered your question there, but I think those are some of the tactics that again, these should be part of a daily routine of MSP when they're looking at generating business.
Absolutely. Yeah. You definitely did answer my question there, Kevin. So that's given us really, really good context as to essentially why web monitoring matters, how we can start opening up those conversations. Kevin, I'm conscious that you've been very generous with your time, and we still have part 2. So before you drop off and go into more about how usecure specifically can work with uBreach Pro, I suppose had one final question for you, and we've covered a lot in this first part of the presentation. And so, if there's one thing that you would like the viewers to keep in mind from this first section before we move on to the solution, what would you say the main thing would be?
I think start thinking about those two vectors, right? And how fast, how fast this problem is evolving, right? It's not going to slow down. It's not. I mean, again, the data shows us that it's speeding up, right? Going from 88 to 96 in a matter of 8 months, right? Every day you're seeing a new AI enabled this, AI enabled that, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them now that are tying into these LLMs to make their tools smarter. So I think, we are in, unprecedented times. And honestly, I think it's going to be the next, call it 5 years, where MSPs will have, from a growth standpoint, which is fantastic, they will have the ability to scale even faster, even larger, because unfortunately, this problem's not going to slow down. It's not going to go away. So I think they need to be thinking, how do they incorporate this? How do they look at sprawl? How do they, you kind of get their mind around this concept of, call it dark web 3.0, because it's the existing exploits, right? It's the the AI enabled exploits, and then it's the fact that the sprawl is just out there. So those vectors are looking at the sprawl and just understanding that it's not slowing down. So yeah, I would I'd lean into this, and it all comes down to training. You got to really show them how bad it is, help them optimize, and then train and reinforce. And that's why this is, in my opinion, this is the wedge. This is the tip of the spear for everything else that you sell as an MSP. So yeah, so get to it.
Brilliant advice. Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate you taking the time, and there was some really great insight in there. It'll be fantastic to have you on a future webinar as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Yep. Perfect. Okay, everyone. So look, some brilliant insight there from Kevin on the current state of .web monitoring, where it's looking to go, what we can do to essentially tap into that opportunity. And that's what the second half of this this webinar is really all about. Is, we've gone through with the domain scan report how we can generate that interest, how we can contextualize this for our clients and really make them understand the risk that exists for their individual organization. What we want to do, though, is turn this into a repeatable, managed, continual service that we can drive value off the back of. And that's where the uBreach Pro product really comes into its own. And so uBreach Pro is ultimately your mechanism to build on that initial report, to turn it into a real continual service that you can provide to your clients. Not just the one-off scan, that's a brilliant foot in the door. It's continual monitoring with real insights, auditing, and remediation. So this is effectively our purpose-built, proactive dark web monitoring module within usecure. So to get started, again, similar to that prospecting report, all we need is your client domain. What we can then do is sync against that domain in our databases, billions of breach data points in there, and we can identify breached users associated with that domain. We will continually scan against that domain, against those users, and monitor for new breaches. But we'll also show you historical breaches. Kevin talked about the importance of not disregarding old data, the fact that it can still be used, the fact that it can still give us an indication about trends, about repeat passwords. So we will show the pre-existing breaches, and we will also monitor for new breaches simply from the client domain. When we receive information about new breaches, we will automatically notify you and or your client about that breach as soon as we find it. Essentially, it's a race, right? This information is out there, it's publicly available. The question is, who's going to act on it first? Will it be the MSP to remediate it, or will it be a malicious actor for their own purposes? Essentially sets a clock to allow us to, now that we've identified that information, to remediate it. So we will continually give those breach alerts, those user notifications about those new breaches. We'll continually give that visibility into breach exposure. We will show that partial information similar to that prospecting report, but we will show this in-app for every breach that we find on every user. We will show the category of information that we find, and we will show the partial password. Again, it's really building on from that initial hook that we've talked about, and it's showing broader information on the entire organization, the entire domain, and also proactively monitoring for future breaches. As Kevin also touched on, the real critical thing here as well is when we have that information, what do we do with it? How do we make sure that the guardrails are up, that the end users are empowered, and that if this information does get exposed, the actual sort of depth of the threat that can come from it is massively reduced? And one of the main benefits of uBreach Pro is that it is integrated within the usecure human risk platform. In that platform, you can conduct your security awareness training. So we can continually educate and develop end users about what the dark web is, about what secure passwords, best practices look like, about things like email usage. We can send them phishing attacks. If we know a lot of your client staff members have been involved in a data breach of a certain organization, we know they use that product, and we know they get regular emails from them, likely for things like newsletters and logins and that kind of thing. We can use this to essentially replicate the type of processes that attackers follow in a safe environment. That's the entire idea here, is identifying this information and then using it in a safe space to be able to use it as an education point to fundamentally reduce that risk. And so uBreach Pro allows you to have a dedicated module to identify these risks, to be notified about them as soon as they happen, and to have them in the same space where you can carry out your remediation steps. You can even log your remediation dates in usecure. So if that client gets audited, you can show that you have proactive monitoring in place to identify these risks and then to log when you have remediated that risk. As a result, you then move from one-off insight into continuous monitoring. One of the things that we found with dark web monitoring, if it's done as a manual scan or maybe as a one-off, quite often clients don't really realize that dark web monitoring might be happening in the background. An MSP might have a solution that will do it automatic scanning in the background, but it's not then communicated to the end users. They're not notified about those new breaches. With uBreach Pro, what we find is, because of those breach notifications, it makes it incredibly visible to the clients what value you are driving. They are under no illusions that you are monitoring the dark web, you are immediately notifying them about these breaches, and you're ultimately resolving them. That really helps to drive that ongoing value. It really helps get that engagement and to cement this as a fundamental part of your offering. If they see the value that you're offering, it makes it much more tangible, and therefore the cost associated with it becomes much easier to contextualize and to identify the return on investment that they would get. And that's quite an important topic that we often hear people ask about. Is it's all well and good saying that we have this product and saying that we can do this continual monitoring and it can give us those insights. Again, it's worth reiterating uBreach Pro is completely automated. Those notifications, that monitoring will just happen on its own accord. But the critical thing here is to make sure that not only are you set up to improve client security through dark web monitoring, but also to make sure that you as an MSP can effectively utilize it as a new revenue stream. And so we really wanted to touch on how you can build the value and revenue around uBreach Pro, how you can build the service and then use that to capture the value. And so the overall framework that we really want to keep in mind here is scan, show, monitor, and then act. We want to scan the dark web, find this information. We want to show our clients that information, show them what information that we found, monitor for additional breaches, and act upon that information. Again, make sure that those risks are being remediated as efficiently as possible. And so by building a service, we touched on this with Kevin, it's about making sure that you have a robust story. It's about understanding that dark web monitoring is a critical part of modern business, but it's also can be used as a thin end of the wedge. It can be used as the tip of the spear. It's an incredibly effective way to build a story around your entire offering as a managed service provider. It can turn those exposures into ongoing conversations. You can standardize it across your customer base by incorporating standardized packages around this, by making sure that you're making it clear how dark web monitoring interacts with security awareness training, simulated phishing, with your email security products. And as a result, you can then present this as a really interactive, really insightful tool and a package for your customers, where again, quite often, the question for the client isn't necessarily what do each of these elements do? It's why should I care about these elements and what impact does it have on me as an organization? And if we can build packages around dark web monitoring, if we can incorporate those with other solutions in your portfolio, all of a sudden you have an ecosystem which the logic behind why you choose to work with those vendors and why you choose to offer those products makes sense. We can build a flow and a story that means that dark web monitoring isn't just an isolated tool. It interlinks with your human risk management and your wider offering as an MSP. If we do that effectively, we can use this to open up those new client conversations. We can use this as a new revenue stream with our partners because it's a different offering. It's a different messaging, but ultimately it's the same outcome of this is how we make you more secure. If we can go to our clients with well thought out packages, well thought out messaging, again, that story and that flow about how dark web monitoring then informs these other things that we're going to do off the back of it, it's really clear to your clients that you're an MSP that has intent behind your offering. We touched on it earlier. It's not a case of, I have this new product, I'm going to try and sell it to them. It's a case of being able to use it as your story, as your hook. And it's a way of making sure that clients can see the value in your offering without just seeing this as just the next thing that we're trying to implement with them. When clients feel confident that they're only going to be offered products which are well thought out, where there is a natural flow, where they interlink with each other and the logic makes sense, it develops much stronger relationships as a result. It differentiates you as an MSP because the story behind you as an MSP is much stronger. You're not just someone that's offering isolated products. You're someone that's offering a managed service, which is interlinked and that is driven by intelligence and foresight rather than just individual products that we've accumulated over time. And so dark web monitoring, again, can be a really effective hook, a really effective way to open up these conversations and ultimately to create better outcomes, to fundamentally make your clients more secure. And so we've covered a lot of information today. And if we had to break it down into 3 steps, simple steps about how to scale from here, it's incredibly easy sometimes to overcomplicate things and to wait for the perfect situation. It's so important to get started. Use those domain scans. They are completely free of charge within usecure. Use them as widely as possible on your client base. We have partners who run them on every single customer and then go to their QBRs with that domain scan report in hand and use that as their opener to talk about dark web monitoring. More scans mean more opportunities. Run those domain scans across your clients. Use that data to start conversations. Make sure that you're really pinpointing the individual email addresses and making it clear to your clients why this matters. Why to them as an SMB this is important, the impact it could have of that information getting in the wrong hands. And then we can introduce continuous monitoring with uBreach Pro. We've identified this snippet of insight into your current risk profile. That profile isn't going to stand still. So let's get continual monitoring in place where we can do wider scans, we can monitor for new breaches, we can notify you about those new breaches, and we can keep an audit trail of when those breaches have been resolved. And that then feeds in nicely with our wider ecosystem of security awareness training, of simulated phishing, of policy management, but also of your wider vendor ecosystem as well. Now, we touched on this earlier. It was one of the important things I really wanted to get Kevin's insight on is enablement and support. We are very conscious that for MSPs, time is a very scarce resource. Trying to spend time prospecting, trying to spend time building business cases can be really tough. We are an MSP focused vendor, right? MSPs are our bread and butter. We have spent an awful lot of time and resource in making sure that we have as many supporting resources for you as possible. We've tried to build everything that you need to launch faster, to sell with more confidence, and to ultimately grow your recurring revenue. lean on us. As Kevin mentioned, be demanding of your vendor, speak to your account manager. Every single MSP has a dedicated one at usecure whose goal is to help you to grow. And within the product, we have assets that are there to help you to get the message out. We have decks, we have one pages, we have email campaigns, we have sales guidance, we have calling scripts, we have sample domain scan reports. We have all the resources that we can possibly think of that are there to help you to communicate why this matters to your clients. We'll even brand those resources for you. It's no need for you to do any white labeling. We have a form where you can just enter your information about your MSP. We will build those resources with your branding on it completely free of charge so you can get started with prospecting and speaking to your customers. You have a dedicated account manager to support you with strategic planning, to help you to identify clients that might be a potentially low-hanging fruit for security awareness and for dark web monitoring. They'll help educate you on the technical aspect of setup, the sales process, how to build up the conversation. Essentially, there'll be an extension of your MSP to help you to start monetizing this right now. And then finally, we have sales sessions with peers. We're always very conscious that it's important to hear how other partners are taking these products and that they're really running with it, hearing their case studies, hearing their challenges, hearing what has worked straight from similar MSPs to yourselves when it comes from taking security awareness training, simulated phishing, humorous management, and dark web monitoring, and using it as a lever to grow. Utilize these resources. They are built to allow you as an MSP to grow as efficiently as possible, and there is a huge amount of enablement that we have ready to go. This also includes, again, that domain scan report, which is readily available to all usecure partners. It's there for you to run on as many of your clients as you possibly can. And then finally, going on to next steps. So you can scan this QR code and speak to an account manager. They will be happy to understand your current situation around humorous management and dark web monitoring, to maybe understand some of the challenges you might have faced in the past, some of the maybe concerns that you might have or questions that you might have around positioning, around technical processes. They can show you how uBreach Pro works in action. They are a resource that are there designed to help you to grow. They can talk you through best practices about how to position the domain scan report and get that in front of your prospects. We are there to help you to fundamentally drive and turn human risk management into a measurable and recurring service. So scan the QR code, make sure to book a demo or a call with an account manager, can be a high level sort of introductory call, and utilize them as a resource to help your MSP to grow with humorous management, with dark web monitoring, and with usecure. So thank you everyone for your time today. I appreciate this was a big session, but I'm hoping there are some really useful insights in here for you around how you can ultimately drive revenue with uBreach Pro. Thank you.